Had a great turnout.
Oh, wonderful.
Really good. Right, okay. So good afternoon, everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. Today's session is focusing on self-care and avoiding burnout, and we're delighted to introduce you all to the confidence coach, author, speaker and TV presenter, Melanie Schilling. So just a little housekeeping before we start. Could we ask that everyone puts themselves on mute during the talk, please, and keep any questions until the end of the session. If you do have questions, just raise your hand and we will pick that up for you. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to Mel. Thanks, Mel.
Wonderful. Thanks, Becky. Now, I would love to share my screen, and I'm not terribly familiar with Teams. I usually work in Zoom. So where do I go to do that? More actions.
Yep, so at the top where it says share.
Hang on a sec. Where are we?
Next door to the leave button.
I don't have those buttons obvious to me right now. Hang on. Is it under more actions? Is it part of that little strip down the bottom? No, I don't have anything.
Do you want to come on, Linda, if you know?
Yeah. Is your bar at the bottom, Mel? Or
Yeah,
at the top.
That's
so at the bottom, you see it says camera, mic, and then there should be an arrow pointing, a little arrow pointing up.
There it is.
That's your share button. Yeah.
Open share tray. Okay, let me open. Okay. Can you guys see my screen now?
Not yet, no.
Not yet. Okay. Now? Can you see my screen now?
Yes.
You can.
Perfect.
Oh, wonderful.
Yes.
Great. Okay, let me just open this right up in the slideshow. Okay, so can you all see that screen? Oh,
We can. Yes. Yeah, we can.
All right. Wonderful. Thank you for bearing with me with my lack of tech genius. It's not what they hire me for, guys. It's really not. Well, thank you so much for having me here today. I mean, it really is one of my favourite topics, talking about not just burnout, but about well-being as a proactive strategy. You know, so often we all talk about, you know, getting to that point of exhaustion, and quite often when you get to that point, and I'm sure you've all experienced this, it's sometimes too late, isn't it? Because you've already started to get into that spiral of overwhelm and things just get on top of you. And before you know it, your health and your mental health are suffering. So what I thought about sharing with you today was a little model and a set of strategies that are really easy to remember, which I think is always important, particularly when stress is involved. And they're techniques for being proactive around managing your well-being and therefore trying to avoid burnout wherever you can. I was looking at, before I jump in, just in case we haven't met or you're not familiar with me, just a very, very quick introduction. So Mel Schilling is my name. I'm obviously Australian. I spent 20 years as a psychologist, 15 years as a consultant and personal coach, and that's included business coaching, personal coaching, dating coaching, 10 years as a speaker, 7 years in the media, and probably most importantly to this chat today, I'm a passionate advocate for psychological health and well-being. So I looked at a little bit of research, and I know none of you will be surprised to see this statistic. 1/3 of NHS workers feel burnt out. My sense is it's probably a hell of a lot higher than that. As we all know, these statistics are only as helpful as the degree to which people are comfortable to report it. And so often, you know, particularly in, you know, emergency services and frontline roles, there is such an incredible pressure on you guys, and there is not always the outlet or the opportunity to put your hand up and say, hey, I'm struggling. My hope is that where you all are, that is a mechanism that's in place, because it's so incredibly important. And my sense is, the fact that you have these Wellbeing Wednesdays, albeit on a Tuesday, that there's a real commitment in your workplace to actually looking after each other, checking in with each other, and ensuring that, you're all okay. And when you're not, that there are things in place that you can do about it. Really, what I wanted to support you with today is giving you some tools to really self-assess. And I actually have an online tool that you can use. It's a free one that you can just go into and do little self-checks around your well-being. So that'll be really helpful after we've talked through this today. So we can start, addressing that statistic and ensuring that, you guys are able to take control of aspects of your life, and particularly your work life, as a way of eliminating some of that burnout. And really what we need to say, and this is quite often the elephant in the room, what we need to do is focus on what's within your control. In your roles, I imagine there are so many aspects of your environment that are outside of your control. Things that probably feel pretty good to complain about. Who doesn't love a moan, right? And it can be really cathartic to have a whinge about things that are going wrong in the workplace, or things that are putting undue pressure on you. But of course, many of those things are outside of your control. Recently, of course, COVID-19, but any other disease outbreak, the broader socio-political environment that you're operating within. Resourcing issues. I know things are tight, so tight for you in the NHS. Even things like the weather can have an impact on, stress and well-being levels. But of course, all of these things are outside of your control. And I'm sure if you had a bit of a water cooler chat with some of your workmates about all of the other things that are outside of your control, you'd probably have quite a long list, I imagine. And it could be a worthwhile thing for you guys to do, even in a morning tea break or something, to just brainstorm. What are all the things that impact our well-being at work that are outside of our control? Get them out, get on a whiteboard or on some paper, and just really brain dump, because it's so helpful to get those things out of your head where they can become frustrating and can niggle away at you, and onto a page and have that discussion with your teammates so that they become normalized. And you can all acknowledge, well, okay, we have no control over resourcing, for example. So let's not invest any energy in worrying about that. It'll only lead to stress. Of course, the only thing you can control is yourself. And by that, I mean your reaction to those stressors in your work environment. This is really where we want to focus in today, on the aspects of yourself and your life that you can have an impact on every day or every week, that you can start to pull these little well-being levers to ensure that you're in a really good place. But more importantly, not just the short term, but to ensure that you're setting yourself up for longer term ongoing mental health. Because that's the goal here, isn't it? It's not just about getting through, it's about thriving. So I guess the issue here, the key issue that comes up, I find time and time again in workplaces, particularly high pressure workplaces, is this idea, and you would have heard this before, that you can't pour from an empty cup. So this is about, you've probably heard the other cliche about, when you're in the aeroplane, you grab the oxygen mask and you put it on yourself first, then you help others. Now, I don't know about you, but I certainly find that in many of the organisations that I've worked in, people who are on the front line, who are doing that stressful work, so often are in the habit of putting others before themselves. And, you might then go home at the end of your busy day and you're putting your family before yourself as well, or your partner, or even your animals. This is something that, particularly in the helping professions, and I know that, this would relate to all of you, it's something you're almost hardwired to do, is to put other people's needs before your own. And I'm here to tell you that does not serve you. it's not going to work for you long term. It's so important that you can find a way to balance meeting other people's needs with looking after your own. You know, you probably see these little memes pop up on Instagram and Facebook all the time. Self-care is not selfish. And I know it's become a cliche, but it's actually true. It is not selfish. It is actually a really proactive health strategy, you know, a bit like going for a checkup or a mammogram or something like that. This is something that you can do around your emotional well-being. The key point here is that when we do neglect our self-care, all other areas of our lives are neglected as well. Just allow that to sink in for a moment and think about the other areas of your life that do get affected. If you're having a stressful time at work, what happens to your intimate relationship? What happens to your parenting style? What happens to your commitment to exercise? What happens to your spiritual life? Every other aspect of your world has that flow-on effect when your self-care is neglected. It's absolutely critical that you can create time to focus on yourself. So there's really a couple of ways that you can start to look at supporting yourself through a stressful work environment. One of them is short-term, which is self-soothing, and I'm sure many of you are doing a lot of this at the moment. You're probably familiar with the idea of sort of mental health first aid or those coping mechanisms, a bit like doing triage for yourself from a mental health perspective. Now, some of these are positive. For example, chatting through the issues with your colleagues or taking a time out, ensuring you have enough water during a shift. These sorts of things can be really, really positive from a coping perspective. Of course, there are many other short-term coping mechanisms that are not so helpful. Maybe it's overusing drugs of addiction or alcohol, or maybe it's not having enough sleep, staying up all night watching TV. You know, you all know what the unhealthy habits are, particularly around eating and drinking and sleep and exercise. The idea here is that, yes, there are times when you need to make yourself feel better in the moment, but making healthy choices to ensure that it's about, you know, dealing with those pillars of well-being, getting enough sleep, having enough hydration, feeding your body, nourishing your body in a really positive and wholesome way. And then there is the longer term approach, which is really what we want to focus on here. So it's about getting that balance between your inner world and your outer world. Yes, sleep, diet, and exercise are critical, and that doesn't have to be hardcore exercise or a really focused diet at all. I'm talking about this within the realms of what would be considered a normal, healthy diet and exercise regime. And sleep hygiene, of course, is really important as well. You know, even if it means putting in a little bit of extra time before you go to bed to ensure that, you know, no screens for an hour before you go to sleep. Have a candle, maybe some lavender oil on your pillow, do some reading or have a gentle conversation with a loved one. These are the kinds of things that can really help set you up for a positive, restful sleep. It's so tempting, isn't it, to sit in bed doom scrolling, as we call it, through your Instagram feed, watching what's going on, and before you know it, you're comparing your body to someone else's or starting to get a little bit of comparisonitis. Not good for sleep particularly. What we really want to do here is have that holistic focus on well-being. And I'm about to share with you a 5-step process that you can go through that will really help you move from, I guess, the theory of well-being into a very practical aspect of how well-being can actually live out in your everyday life. Now, some of you may be familiar with Martin Seligman. He's one of the fathers of positive psychology and a bit of a personal hero to me. I actually got to meet him a few years ago, well, it's probably over a decade ago now, when I was going back and doing extra study in positive psych. And he's just this incredible guy who has dedicated his life to really focusing on what is good about human nature as opposed to what is bad about it. You know, he was one of the first practitioners to say, rather than sit in the therapy chair and talk about everything that's going wrong, let's talk about your strengths. Let's talk about the areas where you are doing well and how can we maximize this? How can we get you from functioning to flourishing? I love this quote from him. Well-being cannot exist just in your own head. Well-being is a combination of feeling good as well as actually having meaning, good relationships, and accomplishment. And these are some of the pillars that we'll drop into in a moment, and pillars that you can actually make a part of your everyday life. So Seligman talks a lot about the science of well-being, and if you're interested in doing a little bit further reading, his book that talks most to this science of well-being is called Flourish, and it's well worth a read. And a lot of what I'm about to go into here is covered in his book. So essentially, we're talking about a 5-step model called PERMA, and that stands for positive emotion, engagement, relationships, and that's positive relationships, of course, meaning, and accomplishment.
Mel, can I just drop in 1 second? We've got no slides at the minute.
Oh, what's happened?
It's just the starting slide that we had.
Oh, have you had any of the slides?
No, it's just a picture of a young girl.
Oh no. No, you haven't had I haven't had slides all along. I'm so
Mel,
sorry.
This happened to me earlier on when I was doing a presentation. If you right click and go and click next instead, rather than using the arrows, that might work.
Let's have a look. Hang on. So I'll go back to the start. Sorry, guys. As I said, they don't hire me for my tech skills. Right.
We've all been having technology problems this morning as well, so don't worry.
Me. Okay. What can you see now? Is it still the little girl, or is it the slide?
It's still the little girl.
Oh no. So that's what you're seeing is just my screensaver. That's not even the slides. Sorry, guys, that's not helpful at all. I'm not quite sure. Can anyone else give me any advice on what I can do differently there? Oh, hang on. Show. Let's see.
Jade, have you got your hand up?
That's where the oversight is. When you press share, what options are you getting when you press share on your screen?
So show device settings, show meeting details.
Are you getting anything that says share content, screen, window, anything like that?
No, so I can stop sharing. Maybe I'll start again. Okay, open share tray again. Okay, so now there's my desktop.
Yeah. Does it say anything like presenter mode or screen or window?
Sorry.
If not, Mel, you could always send them afterwards and I can make sure everybody receives them, so it's not a problem.
I absolutely can do that. Shall I keep going? Because I'm very mindful of your time.
Yep, that's great, Mel.
Guys, is this still helpful?
Yes.
Yes. Okay. Okay. Well, let me just jump back into the slides at my end, and then we'll definitely send them through to you. Where were we? Okay. So, all right. So what I was running through there was the 5 steps, which is PERMA, which stands for positive emotion, engagement, positive relationships, meaning, and accomplishment. So these are the 5 things that Seligman's research found that if you have an aspect of these in your life every day, or at the very least every week, then you're likely to be moving the needle from functioning to flourishing. So really here, and you'll have these in the slides, but basically positive emotion is one of the most powerful aspects here, where the research found that if you have at least 2 or 3 of the top 10 positive emotions in your everyday, then you're starting to find a real sense of well-being. So the top 10 are these: joy, gratitude, serenity, interest, hope, pride, amusement, inspiration, awe, and love. So that's a great little checklist to have with you, even at the end of the day, to sort of have it in your journal and to go back throughout the day and think to yourself, which of these did I experience today? Because when you do, of course, you get that hit of endorphins, the dopamine, the serotonin, and of course, oxytocin, the happy hormones and the love hormones. So this is a way of really inducing that little hit of positive well-being into every day. And so what I'd like you to do is to rate yourself, even just write it down now on a scale of 1 to 10. How would you rate your positive emotion today? Then we'll move on to engagement. Engagement is really tapping into what psychologists refer to as flow, that blissful immersion into a task or activity that you really, really love. And a lot of the research shows that we're more likely to step into a sense of flow when we're playing to our strengths and living our passions. So if you think about your work role, are there aspects in your current job that enable you to play to your strengths? Now, the link I'll share with you later that takes you through to all of the questionnaires. They're from the University of Pennsylvania, which is where Martin Seligman actually operates. And there's a questionnaire there that you can actually complete your signature strengths. So you can find out what are your top sort of 3 or 4, even 5 strengths. Are you getting to use those every day? Because all of the research tells us that if you can create opportunities to play into your strengths, not just at work, but in your broader life as well, every week, then you're more likely to live a flourishing life and to have get that well-being hit in your life. So if you were to rate yourself today between 1 and 10, what would be your level of engagement? To what degree are you in a sense of flow, living your strengths today? The next part of the model is R, which stands for relationships, but it really is positive relationships, because we all know that toxic relationships do quite the opposite of building well-being. This is about surrounding yourself with people where you have love and intimacy and strong, deep emotional connections, where you can be with people who are going to lift you up. You may have all heard of the really famous Harvard study that's been going for over 80 years now, where they basically just look at what makes people happier, what makes people live longer. And time again, what comes up as the number one thing that promotes happiness and longevity, it's positive relationships. It's relationships that do fill your cup. Those relationships you can go to and feel non-judgmental, where you can be vulnerable, you can be raw, you can open yourself up and be your real authentic self with people and feel completely held. You might like to call them your A-list. So have a think about your A-list and who's in there. Are they people who take from you energy-wise or who fill you up? And again, give yourself a rating today between 1 and 10, the level of positive relationships in your life today. And then we have meaning, which is probably the one that is much more personal, I find, for individuals. What creates meaning in your life? And for some people, this is a spiritual or a religious thing. For other people, it's about working toward the higher good. You know, when you're there in your NHS environment, do you tap into that higher purpose about helping people and giving back to the community? Or is it something else? Essentially, this is asking you to tap into your why. What is your why? because the research tells us that when you are working through the hard slog and the stress of everyday life, but you can tap into that higher purpose, you're more likely to get that sense of well-being in your work. So think about that and rate yourself today on that scale of 1 to 10. To what degree do you have meaning in your life today? And then the final part of the model is A, which stands for accomplishment. And, you know, this is from the small things like ticking things off your to-do list, all the way through to having weekly or monthly or long-term goals. Do you have a career path, for example? Can you see where you want to head in your career? And outside of your career, do you want to go and climb a mountain? Do you want to run a marathon? Do you want to get married? What are the big goals that you're working toward in your life? And, you know, Seligman's research found that this was a very consistent thing, characteristic of people who live a flourishing life. They always are working toward a goal, stretching themselves, building themselves further. So if you were to rate yourself today on that scale of 1 to 10, how would you rate your level of accomplishment? Now, I'm very happy to open it up to questions there, but also incredibly mindful that you haven't seen any of the slides. Let me grab the link for you so you can all go to the questionnaire centre. It's called Authentic Happiness. Let me just grab that for you. Copy. Right, can I jump into the chat? Yes, chat, here we go. Okay, there's the link that should pop up. There it is. Okay, happy to answer questions now. We're about to run over, so terribly sorry that that ran so late.
Thanks, Mel. That was great. Do you want to just stop sharing your screen and we can just ask if anybody wants to ask any questions? Anybody like to put their hands up?
Has that stopped sharing?
It has, yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good.
Do we have any questions? Jennifer?
Hi Mel, it was a really great session, thank you for that. Mine's actually, I'm afraid to say, a married at first sight question just before we end for everyone. What did you really think of Harrison?
Oh my gosh, couldn't you tell from my face?
Yes!
I'll tell you something fascinating that I only learned very recently about him. His mother, apparently, she's a life coach. And so whenever he'd have a fight with Bronte or something was going wrong, he'd sneak off onto the balcony and call his mum and get some advice from his mum. And then he'd come back in with all the buzzwords, and all of a sudden he'd be talking about, you've crossed my boundaries, you're gaslighting me. And, you know, he'd start tapping into all of those buzzwords. And it kind of makes sense because you saw him doing that, didn't you? Oh, you're welcome, everybody.
Thanks, Jennifer. Thanks, Mel. Any more questions? There's quite a lot of thank yous in the chat as well, Mel, so you can have a look at those.
Guys, again, I'm so sorry that the slides didn't work. That's not great on my end.
Oh, don't worry, that's fine. I'll ensure everybody gets it afterwards. We've got Sarah Pinder.
Thanks, Becky. Hi, Mel. Great to meet you. Great fan and a really informative session. Thank you. My question is, I think this is probably one of my struggles, is that was really helpful what you've just told, that model, and certainly there's things I could pick up on that. It's the relationship and the toxic and positive. How would you approach something where actually maybe one or two people could be both? And that's where the battle's coming in, because you can see the positives, but actually there's a lot of other things. So it's about balance. How do you then manage almost that conflict of the do both, and you're trying to get more of the positive, but actually the negative and toxic bit can be quite stressful, and that can be home or work.
Yes,
Thank you.
yeah, that's a really good question, Sarah, and I think a lot of people will relate to that because it's really complex and relationships are so nuanced, aren't they? They're not just black and white, positive or negative. I think it comes down to your own personal boundaries and the way that you set that up with that person. You know, it can be tricky, you know, with some people who are giving you some positive support with one hand and then almost taking it away, you know, with some of their negative traits in the other. You know, sometimes depending on the relationship, it can be about setting your own rules that you don't even share with them. For example, saying to yourself, I'll only spend time with that person when I know I'm feeling really resilient. So when I'm stressed, I won't go to them because there's a risk that they could be either a positive or a negative impact on me. So it's almost like doing a risk assessment and saying, you know, that person is not entirely safe for me. I will only go to them when I'm already, let's say, an 8 out of 10 in terms of my resilience or strength on that day. And I'll save my vulnerable times for people who I know I can be 100% vulnerable with. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Good.
Thanks, Sarah. Thanks, Mel. So on behalf of everybody on the call today and the health and wellbeing team, we'd just like to say thank you for giving up your time to do this session. So Mel's done this as a tribute to the NHS. So we'd just like to say thank you. And thank you everybody for joining.
Thank you for having me. And again, I'm so sorry about the slides. I'll send them through to you, Becky. And again, that link to make sure what you do with this. It's a questionnaire center on the website. You go through and you set up an account. It's all free. And there's so many different questionnaires you can do in there, all about well-being and mental health. They're fantastic. They're not clinical at all. They're all sort of looking at, you know, normal stress levels within sort of, you know, that, not that any of us are normal, but within that normal distribution of life. So I think you'll find them really, really helpful. And in terms of this 5-part model, the PERMA model we've talked about today, there's a super quick, just literally 5 questions you can go through and just see how each of your PERMA are tracking at any point. So it's really quick and really, really helpful. Just a good check-in with yourself. I'd really recommend doing that regularly.
Brilliant. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining.
That's a pleasure. Thanks, everyone.
Thank
Have
you.
a wonderful day.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you.
Are you okay to stay on for 5 minutes, Mel?
Take care.
Thank you.